So we're going to look at a bit more about optimization, a little bit more about kind of some of the more tools that I use for Maya, but we're also going to look at UVs and light maps. Has anybody ever heard of light maps before? Okay, not sure. I'll still explain it anyway, even if only one of you had heard of it before. So a light map is basically a second UV channel, which, when in the engine, allows the engine to bake lighting. It allows to bake lighting information into the second UV channel, so that at runtime you're not doing everything dynamically. Because if you ran everything in dynamic at runtime, you would get slow build times. So there has to be a mix of baked and real-time lighting in a scene. For example, if your object is movable, then you wouldn't want to bake the lighting into the floor, because, for example, if you shot the item, I think I showed you last week, if it shot it and it was already pre-baked into the floor, you would see the shadow even if the object wasn't there anymore. So normally, general rule of thumb is if it doesn't move in an environment, then it's baked. If it does move, or there's a chance of it being destroyed or flung around the scene, then it's dynamic. What do you think characters fall under? Yeah, simple as that. Even if they're not really moving. Obviously, statues, depends. If it's going to break and blow up, then yes, it's dynamic. If it's static, then it'll stay still, so it's baked. So yeah, that is the general rule of thumb: is if it moves, dynamic. If it stays still, baked. And sometimes you have to kind of work your way around these things. Now, I was having a lot of trouble with convincing the people who were working on the mobile football game that I was working on to not just use dynamic lighting, because it was just killing the mobile devices, especially with older devices which they wanted to support. It just kills the frame rate. So I gave them a couple of creative solutions on how to fix this, and one of them was actually, because the stadiums, they wanted shadows on the stadiums, but because the stadiums upgraded, in Unity you can't bake lighting into an object that then changes. It would then have to recalculate the lighting, which can be very costly on mobile. So one of the solutions that I found for them was actually baking all the lighting in a similar lit scene and then asset loading from that scene into the main game once you needed it. But they didn't want to do that. The programmer was like, "Oh no, that's too hard." And it's like, "No, I've just given you the article on how to do it. There's the article. This is the theory. I just can't do it because I'm not a programmer. Because in Unity, it's very programmer heavy if you want to do a lot of technical stuff." So lighting, especially for mobile, is very important to be baked, because you just cannot run that much dynamic lighting in mobile. The only thing that should be dynamic is characters on mobile, and even then, half the time you would fake it. Like one of the things that you can do to fake lighting is paint the shadow into a little alpha map on the bottom of the character, and that follows the character around. So that's one way of like tricking, like faking lighting and stuff for mobile that you can kind of get around. But anyway, so a light map is basically a second UV channel that tells the engine to bake all the lighting information inside of that. Now, as standard, you could bring your asset into Unreal, and you could use the standard light map editor inside of Unreal Engine 4. But the only problem is you can't edit the UV. So if there's an error, say you've got a baking error of such and such a percentage overlapping, then you wouldn't be able to edit it in Unreal. You still have to bring it back into Maya and fix it and that sort of stuff. So most engines you can use Unity, especially you can use the inbuilt one and it works fine. But Unreal, it's a little bit temperamental. So when you're using Unreal, it's best to activate the UV channel yourself. Now, other times that extra UV channels are used is film. So, for example, like Godzilla, I think, had 20 UV channels. for the mesh in the film renders, and that's because they would use the different UV channels to bake different lighting information into them, so that they didn't have to keep like reapplying new materials or new UV channels. So they'd have like a whole range of different lighting scenarios which are baked into those UV channels on there. So it's quite a powerful thing. So I'm going to show you how to make a light map today, which it's really easy. It's just you need to know a little bit of calculations and why we do those calculations. But to begin with, I want to show you. This is like a Blue Peter moment. So this is my mesh now, ready to go. So it's ready to be textured. It's been UV'd except for, where are you? Okay. So it's been UV'd. I still need to put this into 0 and 1 space. For some reason it's out of it. But yeah, it's been UV'd and it's been optimized as well. So in total, this fountain is, okay, I can't see, 864 polygons tries. So that's nothing. Like anything below 1,000 is nothing. Let me just put my glasses on. And make sure I can see out of my glasses. So yeah, so that's nothing in try count at all. Now I'm gonna just go back to my original blockout, my base sculpt. So this is what I took into the engine. This is what I take into ZBrush to sculpt. So it's a little bit different. As you can see here, I've got this trench built in. I've also got this lip built in as well. And you'll notice that these are also split into sections, and that's because when I do a subdivide, it's going to give me nice creases, and it's also going to give me the information I can sculpt on the edges and stuff like that. So what I do first is, and that's interesting, is I would, once I've like kind of done this and I'm ready to kind of do the game ready model, I would strip some of these polygons out because I don't need them. So first off, I would select all the faces, deselect the middle faces and click delete. That's going to get rid of my outer faces because this is all going to be connected to each other. So there's no point having those faces there. It's a fountain as well, so it's not going to get flipped over. So I'm going to delete the bottom faces. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these two edges and I'm going to press Control Delete, because that's going to get rid of my edge loops. And the reason why I don't just press delete, and probably people have seen this already, is if you just press delete, it keeps the vertices still there, which is not what we want. So make sure when you're deleting edges, you're always pressing Control Delete, because it's going to delete the vertices as well. Failing that, I'm just going to make sure these are merged. And then that's it really. So then I can go, okay, and I just rinse and repeat that. And bring that back. And then when I'm happy, what I'll do is I'll start to UV these. Let me just get rid of these edges. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to combine these together. Because at the end of the day, I don't need... What I'm doing there is I'm merging the vertices. So I'm holding shift, right mouse button, and I'm merging the vertices so that there's no vertices sitting on top of each other. And I'm actually going to get rid of these edges because they're not holding geometry. They're not holding shape. So there's no point in them actually being there. So we can actually get rid of those. So general rule of thumb when you're deleting edges and faces and that sort of stuff, if it's holding the silhouette of the shape, then you don't delete it. But if it's not holding the shape and it's not doing anything, then you can get rid of it's normally a construction line that's been there to thingy it. So that's ready to go. Let's have a look at how many UV vertices. Got to make sure. And that's why this is so useful to have up, because you can see how many verts you're selecting. So I know, here we go. I knew there was an issue because there's no way there should be 33 verts. So what I can do is, I can fix this now. So merge verts, and then with that line, control delete, and there you go. So now it should be like 26 verts. And I can go into like see-through mode as well, which is this little button here. I can also isolate the object as well, just in case I want to have a look at that. So now this is ready to UV. I think this one as well. Like I said, if I remember rightly, I think I closed. Oh no, I kept it. Fair enough. So yeah, so I actually kept this little indent in there. So, but you could just get rid of it because of like the detail in there. You don't necessarily need it, but again, it's very low poly anyway. So I kept it in. If I just go back to the base sculpt, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to just UV this. So because I'm using my laptop, I use the UV editing tool here, which means that it gives me both my 3D space and my UV editor and my outliner, but I can turn that off if I want in here, so I can see it all on one screen. So when I'm like moving around and doing stuff, when I used to move around a lot as a freelancer and stuff like that, I could easily just work on one screen. You guys might have two screens. I'd highly put your UV editor on the other one, but yeah, this is good compromise in kind of working. So when I UV, there's a couple of things I use. So the main thing I use is automatic. Now, when you use automatic, you can probably remember it from thinking you still need to clean up the UVs. You still need to make them make sense. Like you can't just hit automatic map and then there you're done with it. So there's a few things you need to do. So I always start with an automatic map. And then what I do is, you see how some of these are ski width? What I can do is I can straighten these up. So if I hold shift, right mouse button, I can go straighten UVs. And I'll do the same again. I'm going to hit the G key to repeat the last tool I used. And it just means when it comes down to, and all I'm doing is double clicking to select the faces to kind of do that. And it just means when it comes down to just simplicity and quickness and that sort of stuff, that's where using the rotate tool. And if it's straight, then it's going to be a lot easier to kind of manage and put together with other things. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the UVs. So I'm going to go, okay. Oh, hello. Where are you? Okay. So, and I'm just going to hit stitch. So select the edge, stitch. Like so. So then I've got my first UV, and I can just drag that off for the time being. The only issue I might find is, let me just go on to the, let's see how I did this. Oh, okay, yeah, I did cut it, yeah, fair enough, it's here. I'll do that again on here, so I'm just going to go automatic map. I'm going to just make sure these are straight, just so it's easier. And again, I'm going to start from here and go stitch together, stitch, stitch. Move it off. And again, gonna automatic. Now this is a little bit different because it's on an angle, so it's going to be very hard to kind of stitch this together. So what we need to do is we kind of need to orientate the shell. Now you guys are so lucky because this never used to be in. When I was learning and when I was working in industry, this tool was never in Maya, and it was only a couple of years ago they decided to buy this guy called who'd made a plugin called Nightshade UV, which had so many different functionalities. Like it had the textile density, it had the like all these tools that you see down here. So they've luckily bought that company out, integrated their tools into the workflow, and it's been a godsend ever since. And like Maya is probably the strongest UV tool out there. But anyway, so we need to orientate these, so we can go under arrange layout and go to orientate shells. And what this does is it just lines them up a little bit, words a little bit better. And again, I'm going to do the same. So I'm just going to stitch, 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 stitch. Okay, and I can straighten these once they're stitched. Like, there's no harm in that. Now, if I was to try and straighten all of these using the UVs, nope, come on. Oh, you don't want to work now. That's not. Never wants to work when I want it to work. Anyway, what would basically happen is sometimes you would get ski whiff and loads of different things going wrong. So, yeah, sometimes it's just easier to leave it as it is, and then I'm just going to rotate it. Let's have a look. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So that's for hard surface stuff. It's very mechanical, so it's very straight edge, and that obviously for characters it's a little bit different. You have to kind of use some of the you have to kind of sew the seams as best as possible. So you have to think about where the seams of the head is going to go, where the seams of the clothes, that sort of stuff, and kind of hide that in the mesh. And one of the tools I find which is really useful for more organic shapes is something called Unfold. I'm just holding Shift right mouse button to do that. And that will kind of relax the UVs. Now, you can overdo it, and it won't work. But for just for certain shapes, and especially for organic stuff, it's quite good as a tool because it allows you to kind of just unfold it and soften it a little bit. Thingy on there. So yeah. So basically, I'd go around and, like, for example, like this. There's no need for that many polys, basically. So I'd kind of merge those to center. What I would do as well is I'd actually, before I do that, before I ruin it, let me just come off the editor and let me just isolate it. I'd actually cut it in half. So I use multiple edge loops. And what that does is, so when I go to insert edge loop, so if I, let me just select the object, shift right mouse button, insert edge loop tool, I use this square, and then what I do is change the multiple edge loops, to this one here. And what this does is it takes the center point from here to here and applies the mesh. It applies the line there. So it means that is definitely in the middle of this object. And then what I would do is just delete that side and maybe like separate this as well. So it's thingy. And then I'd fix it. So like, I knew that was wrong because it should be 6 selected and it selected 7, so I know that's wrong. And then this last one. And then what I would do is, with this edge, delete it. And then I just select the faces, grab the scale tool and hold J and just bring it inwards like that. And that means that it's now straight. So it's fine. And then what I do is UV this. So UV editing, automatic map. You can see this is taking up a lot of space in the UV shell. So this is probably not the best way of doing it. So what I would do is grab the faces and create, go to cut and sew and create UV shell. I could cut it, but it means it could cut both parts. So I'm going to create UV shell. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me, and all I'm doing is going back to face, because if I try and select that now, it's not going to work. What this has done is it's creating UV channel, its own UVs basically. So if I rotate this now, it's not attached to this, but it means that I've still got a good basis to work from. I'm going to make sure they go all the same way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add stitch. And I'm just drag marquee tool in and just hitting G to repeat the last process that I did. And there you go. And then one of the cool tools that I use is distribute, which just puts them all together for me. Or I could go stack shells and it can put it all together. And once I'm happy, I'll do a UV layout, which automatically does it for me based off calculations that I've done. One thing I always do, and I'll show you in a minute, is make sure the textile density is correct across the whole object. But with that done, I can then go, okay, let's duplicate this. I'm just going to, all I did there was duplicate, so Control D, and then I changed the scale, so -1. Nope. -1. And it will flip the object in the opposite directions because I put it with -1. The only issue is it's now flipped. Now, red UVs, sometimes it's unavoidable, especially if you've got a very tight budget, like polygon, tri-count, and texture budget. But most of the time, we can get away with not having red UVs, and this basically means the UVs are flipped. So what we would have to do then is we'd have to actually flip them back. So if we go to flip, it means now they are going in the right direction. Now, the reason why we would flip UVs is, especially if you've got font or anything, any decals on there with names and images and that sort of stuff, because it will be flipped. But also nowadays, because of the texture sizes that we're using, we don't have to necessarily overlay UVs over the top of each other, because normally 9 times out of 10 we've got some kind of unique sculpting in there, or painting in there, or damage detail in there that we don't necessarily need to always overlay the UVs. That being said, sometimes we do, and that's if we've got a very tight texture budget and we've got lots of multiple objects that don't need anything uniqueness on them. Then we can duplicate at the top. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to combine these together. I'm going to merge this one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it. Now that completely screws the UVs up. So what we'll have to do is just re-UV that, which is fine. Doesn't take too long. Okay. So there. Now I'm just going to quickly UV this. So you got it, so you can see it. Now sometimes doing UVs this way won't work, and you have to kind of figure it out. I also use SO a lot. Okay, Reagan, but I'm holding Shift right mouse button, and that's all I'm doing. And then all the tools that you use are within this radial menu here. Okay, so what I just used there was something called SO. And you can find all the tools here as well. So like sew, stitch, cut. And if I hold Shift right mouse button, sew these two edges together, it's going to sew them together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to level these out because at the moment they're a bit weird. So I'm going to go to Shift right mouse button, align UVs, and then min U, max U. And that just straightens it up a little bit. Where are you? So I'm just using those tools that I've just shown you to do this. And I can also select them and drag them out a bit just to make them a bit more even. Okay. Just going to combine these back together. Okay. Cylinders are a little bit different. So there's a couple of ways to do cylinders. One of them would be to do something called a unitize, which basically, if I remember rightly, let me just sort this out. So I'm just going to cut these out. And same with these ones. So I'm just going to cut these. That means that they're now not sewed together, so it's not as I can just move them individually basically. So if you make a mistake and sew something to something that you didn't want, you can just come along, select the face, and you can cut it from that selection basically. So I'm just going to grab all of these shells just to demonstrate this. Now I gotta remember where this is because I always forget where it is. I mean, that's a good tool because it normalizes all the size of them, which is good. But that's not the tool I want. So under Modify, there's a tool called Unitize. What that does is it basically makes all of those shapes a square. Now, bear with me because obviously that's not a square, that's a rectangle. Those things are not squares. So what we can then do is we can shape it. Okay, and the issue that we've got is, can you see how these are going one way and these are going the other? And that's because they're not in the right direction. So I'm just going to select these. Actually, I'm going to undo all that. You can see that they're different ways. So what we're going to do is we're going to make them all go the right way. So if I select these faces and then select these faces, and I'm just going to rotate them using this tool here. So now they're all the right way, basically. So if I start to make scale, you can see that they're scaling correctly. Now, the issue we've got is that they're stretched. There we go. I'll rotate them again. And I'm trying to make a square, basically. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make sure that there's no stretching like that, or there's no stretching like that. That it is a square. Roughly. There you go. By eye. And what that means now is, obviously for these ones, I would take them out because they're not square, are they? They're squished. So you're going to get stretched UVs on that. I'm just going to make them so they're roughly the same shape as what they are on the 3D model, basically, those faces. Same up here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these edges. Now, I could go in individually and select them, or I can do Control, right mouse button, to edge ring, and it will select the whole edge ring. The only issue is it will select these bottom two, which we don't want. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to sew these together. So, or stitch together. And you can see now that you've got those lines, which is good. And we're going to just do the same with these as well. And the seams are up here and down here. Okay, so this method allows you to kind of pick where you want your own seams, basically. And there you go. And there I've got like very straight UVs. There's no warping, there's no stretching, and they're uniformed as well. So unitize is really good for that. So that's what it's called. It's called unitize. For these, obviously, then what I can do is with the edge pieces, I can cut them. And what we can do is we can select these edges, stitch together. Same with these ones, stitch together. And then what we'll do is I'll sew these. So I'll sew these pieces together like this. So, and the worst case, I can straighten those out if it lets me. If not, I can do the align UVs. Now, can you see how that didn't stitch together? Now, if I select that edge here, it should select this edge here, but it doesn't because it's not actually merged together yet. So if I grab the vertices and hold Shift right mouse button, merge vertices, you'll notice the vertices go down. And when I select that edge, it selects another edge. So it's a good way of finding out if you haven't you haven't merged the vertices yet. So it's another kind of check to make sure. Okay. Another thing that you might get warning errors. One of those is your mesh has what's it called? Non-manifold geometry. Now, there's two ways. You can fix it yourself, or you can ask the Maya to fix it for you using the cleanup options. And you can find cleanup options under mesh, and it's cleanup down here. So you'd select the object and do a cleanup, or you can hold Shift right mouse button, clean up. So some of the tools inside the UV editor won't work if you've got non-manifold geometry, and that's basically when geometry is within geometry, or it's attached wrong. It's a weird one, but so if I test it on here and say clean up matching polygons, I can click apply. And you can see nothing's been highlighted, and that's because there's no problems with this mesh. And it's the same, you can do the same with more than 4 sides. So this is a good way to check whether you've got n-gons. So you can click apply, and that's not got any n-gons. But if I 4-sided, whoa, don't do that. There we go. It's selected all the 4 sides. So yeah. So cleanup is a really good tool to kind of like make sure that your tools, your meshes are clean, basically ready for thingy. Now, if I just hide this a minute and go to the UV, you can see that what I did was I kind of added a bevel to these corners. And I did that after I UV'd. And the reason for that is because once I've UV'd these, it will create the geometry for me in the UV. So instead of like beveling it first and then waiting for it to, and then I have to stitch it back together myself, what I did was I UV'd everything and then I went round and beveled what I needed to bevel, basically. Because with bevels, nothing's ever 90 degrees, or it's very rarely 90 degrees in terms of edges. So you always kind of add a little bevel in there to either support the silhouette, or to support a normal map bake, or to support a normal map capture. So like capturing the information from that bit. So yeah. So I normally do that after the fact. So I normally UV and then do the bevels after the UV because it does it automatically for me, and I just have to sew it back together in there. So pretty much the most of this is now being UV'd. Some of it's got bevels. I still need to put a bevel on these bits. So like I'd select these. And then hold shift, right mouse button, bevel edge. Now that's way too big of a bevel, so I'm going to change this to like a 0.2. Still way too much, 0.1. Yeah, 0.05. Stylize, that's fine. Maybe 0.03. There we go. So it's matching the top bit. And what that's basically doing is just like softening the edge. Now, the only issue is I should have put a bevel there and a bevel there, because you can see the difference in it. So I can just undo and select those edges, select these bottom edges, and hit bevel. And it's 0.02. Maybe let's not have a conversation about computers in the general chat and save it for questions. So then you've got this kind of bevel here, and it gives a nice softer feel to the edges, basically. I do the same on this as well. And you know that your UVs are going around, you know you're merged in terms of verts because it's going when you do that selection, when I double click on the edge, it goes all the way around instead of just stopping at certain points. So if it stops at certain points, you know you've either got like a face inside of here, or you've got a vert not merged, basically. I'm just going to click bevel again. I'm going to bevel this like 0.1. You see how it's not as harsh the silhouette of it. And especially for stylized, you want to kind of get that nice soft edge on there. But it doesn't really affect the UVs much. As you can see here, all it's done is just add an extra UV space for where the bevel is. So you can see here, which is really good. It means that you don't have to then painstakingly do small bevels in the UV. You can just UV it and then bevel it. Same with this as well. Like I would add small bevels. And I'm just double clicking on the edges, or I'm double clicking to select the whole edge loop. So let's do that. I think that should be fine. I'm just going to bevel that now. So you get a nice softer silhouette. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to delete this bottom face. It lets me, because we don't need it. Now, for this, like I could go around and bevel every single one, but I can just duplicate them. So if I just get rid of these, I can then, with this one, I'm just going to go in my top view, which is spacebar. I'm just going to duplicate this and place it. First, what I want to do is just double check the UVs as well. Yeah, that's fine. Go back to here. And then I'm just going to press combine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this to, I got rid of the center point. And press Control D and then hit the X -1 in the X. That didn't work. There we go. -1 in the Z. You can see now it's flipped directly to the opposite side where I want it. So this is really useful. The only issue is now, again, we look at the UV editor. If I freeze the transformations, it's red. So we just have to make sure we flip. There you go. So once I'm happy and I've UV'd everything, we're going to want to put this onto our layout because it's a prop. So we're not going to go outside of 0 and 1 for it. We're going to keep it in 0 and 1. So the thing that you need to do is you need to use something called, first you need to set the texel density. So texel density relates to the size of those squares that you can see on your UV editor here. So this little checkered bar here, which is what I use. You could use your own. You could import it as a material and put it on your own, but this one does the job. Also as well, I have shaded UV shells on, so that's, if I didn't, that's what you could see. But at least with this, you can tell if it's flipped or not. So I always keep that on. But anyway, so we need to make sure that these squares have a consistency. So first, we could get the texel density. So we could actually, let me just drag these back in and just delete the history on them. So we could grab the overall texel density for the whole mesh, which is 2.25 with a map size of 2048, which is fine. What I tend to do is round this number up, just so it's easy to remember, because what you want to do is in a scene you want to keep, and a prop, especially props, you want to keep them at the same texel density. So and normally you will be given a texel density to work with, which you then have to use in this calculation. So we're going to use 3 for this because this is what it's calculated, and I'm going to round up. So if I click set, that means now all of these squares are the same size across every single object in this prop. So if I do it to 5, you can see it a little bit better. So once I've done that, I can now start to put this into basically 0 and 1 space. So I use a tool called Layout, which is under Arrange and Layout. If I click layout, it's going to automatically do it for me. But I want to show you some of the options. So if I hold shift and left click, it's going to bring up the menu. And with that, then I can thingy. So what we're going to use for this, we're going to use Unfold 3D. We are actually going to use Legacy in a minute when we do the light maps. But to begin with, we're going to use Unfold 3D because it has a really good packer. So basically, it's a really good UV layout packer. And then what we're going to do is change some of the settings. So I'm going to change it to 2048, my texture size. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't later on reduce the size of the texture. Actually, it's better to work high to low than low to high in textures, because the quality is going to be better at 2048. And then what we did for the mobile football stuff was we did everything at 2048. And then when it came to putting it into the build, we reduced it to like 512, 256, 128. So textures work in the powers of 2. So it's always power of 2. So back in the day, they'd use like 32 by 32 or 64 by 64. Nowadays, we use a lot of 1024 by 1024 or 512 by 512. You can go up to, there are 8K textures, which are 8096 by 8096. But yeah, you tend to use like 1024 by 1024, or what you'll do is you'll build high like at 2048 or 4K, which is 4096, and then port it down to what's needed for that project. So we're just going to use 2048 for this example, and then we're going to change the shell padding to 5, and that means each one of these bits is a shell, and we're going to have 5 pixels between them all, basically. So click apply. And then it lays it all out. Now, this is fine for this. This should have enough resolution. One thing you want to test this sort of stuff. So you want to test your baking, you want to test the UV resolution, and it's going to come down to practice and like repetition to kind of get this stage down. Does anybody like UV? Like from last semester, did you enjoy UV? And did anybody? Right. Yeah. I mean, people do it in different ways. Like, and I'm not saying my way is the best way, because it probably isn't. So I've definitely over the years adopted other people's workflows into my UVing, because I used to find it a pain, but nowadays it's pretty quick and easy, because it's all about just knowing the kind of rules and that sort of stuff, especially with textile density. As long as the textile density is good, and the UVs aren't stretched or warped and that sort of stuff, you can get away with a lot. So yeah, so with UVs as well, with the baking technique, you need to make sure the UVs work for what you're baking. So it's best to kind of do test bakes as you're going along. Like for everybody who's making the environment, build a small prop to test this on. So properly test your workflow before you implement it for the whole project, because then you're not getting halfway down the line and you've built everything and then it just doesn't work because you have it built in such a way that thing. So you really have to. It's a process, and what I tend to always tell my students is don't leave UV until the end. Like, modeling UV as you go, because you'll notice problems and you can fix them quicker, basically. And it means that if you don't like UV and you're not leaving it all till the end, you can go as you go. Now with characters, it's different because it's a different kind of workflow. And what I would suggest is if you've got a piece of armor, retopologize it and then UV it and bake test it. So you can still do that bake testing for high to low poly, but you're not like wasting all your time trying to do it one way and it not working and you're having to scrap things and that sort of stuff. So you can still do that with characters, but it is a lot harder because the characters take longer to do, really. But there's less jobs as character artists in the industry. Like you look at any job specs, and there'll be, it depends where you're applying for, but there'll be a lot of environment artist positions come up, and junior character positions are very far and few between. So I do take that into account. But anyway, so the layout's done. So I'm happy with this. I can now take this into Substance Painter and start to bake the detail down and to paint detail into it. But we're not going to do that today because I'm not ready. I still haven't finished the sculpt. I'm a bit behind on that. But yeah, so this is ready to go. Now, what I want to show you today is I want to show you light maps and how you would do those light maps on here. So as you can probably notice from your UV editor, your squares are different to my squares. And that's because I've already done a calculation. Because inside of Maya, you need to tell the UV editor grid to be a certain calculation. And that calculation is 1 divided by power of 2. So if you want your light maps to be around 128 in Engine, then you would need to do a calculation of 128 divided by 1, which 0.00125 is that calculation. And I think I'm crap at maths. That's just it being ingrained in my memory from using it for a very long time. So if I just get the calculator out and just remember that calculation, so 128. No, sorry, 1 divided by 128. So 1 divided by 128. So it's 0.0078125. We'll put that in the general chat so you remember it. It's 1 divided by 128 equals 0.0078125. Okay. That basically means when you bring it into Unreal Engine, it's going to calculate the light map based off that calculation, so the distance. So each one of these squares is a pixel. And in light maps, you have to have 2 pixels distance between the UV shells. So at the moment, they're not that, basically. So we need to fix that, which we'll do in a minute. So yeah, each one of these is a pixel, and to change the grid, we just go into, and I always forget where this is. We go into View, Grid, a bit like when we changed the grid for the other thing we did, this grid here, and we put the calculation in grid lines every. So we keep these all the same, and we change this to 0.0078125. Now, I don't click enter, I don't click off, because what it'll do is it'll shorten this number and you'll be out by a percentage. So when you bring your objects inside of Unreal, it will say you are out by a percentage, blah blah blah, and that's because you pressed enter here, and you're probably out by like a pixel. So I'm going to click OK, click apply. Now that didn't do anything because surprisingly it's already set up right. So if I just reset this, you can see this is what it looks like from your angle, probably, these massive squares. And what I'm going to do is just click that, click apply, and then that will change it to there. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a new UV channel, because if we change the UV channel on this, it's going to screw up the texture. So we need to make sure we change the UV channel. And if I drag this up, you'll notice that I've got all these things. Now the problem is, at this stage, it's not combined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to combine it. I'm just going to delete the history, freeze the transformations, and send to the pivot. I'm just going to hide this. So it's this one. So I can get rid of that. And I'm just going to make this fountain final. Okay, so I can't think of anything there. So instead of having like all these objects here, which would take ages to do the light map, we always do the light map at the end, just before we bring it into Unreal. So it means now I'm on this one, it's fine. So I can copy a new UV. So I'm going to copy the default UV set here. Now, what I did there was I clicked on the little square here, and then I can change the name. I can call it Light Maps. Click Apply. And what that's done is it's now duplicated the top one onto a different one. So if I make a change on here and go back to map 1, it's still the same. So I don't damage the texture, basically. That is the biggest important part I can take away from today, is make sure you copy your light map. I'm just going to undo that. So making sure that I'm working on the light map, so I select it. I'm going to go to layout, so hold shift left click. And I'm going to change it to legacy. Now the reason why I'm not using Unfold 3D to do this was because legacy works the best for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the spacing preset to 128. And I'm going to click apply. It's not going to do anything because it didn't have anything selected. So I'm going to select all the UVs. I'm going to click apply. And now what that's done is it's taken the calculation of the grid, which is set to 0.0078125. And it's now basically given 2 pixels wide distance on the light map. So if I now export this, I always click back on map 1, but it doesn't matter. It will know that this is the UV channel for that. And I'm going to history, freeze, export selection. I'm actually going to change the pivot if I want to. And I'm going to call this I'm going to export it. And I'm just going to load up the Epic Launcher. When are they going to bring a new Titanfall out? If anybody's played Titanfall. You're teasing me with this crappy Apex Battle Royale. And then you like take all the fun bits out of what made Titanfall fun. Anyway, sorry. I know. I'm just sweaty. That's it. Just a minute. Just on YouTube, there's going to be a rant in the middle of this lecture. Anyway, so oh, did I do an Unreal demo? Ah, yeah, okay. I'll just wait for Unreal to load. Has everybody got a copy of ZBrush who needs it now, by the way? Okay, cool. I mean, they've only just given it to me as well. I mean, I'm not even using any of the university equipment for teaching online because, yeah. I did have a version at the start of the year because I was doing freelance, so I had a full paid version, but I'm not doing any freelance in ZBrush at the moment, so yeah, I've had to switch to it. But I was still paying for it out of my own money to do stuff with the university. So yeah. Okay, so I got this. So if I drag this in, just right click, remember, for that. Open. There's a couple of things I need to do, and one of them I need to do is I need to actually untick generate light map, because we don't want Unreal to generate the light map. Now, it's not at the end of the day. It's not at the end of the day that is, sorry, it's not the end of the world if you do it, because we can turn it off in the FBX launcher. But it's better just to get into the habit of turning this off if you've done your own light map, basically. Do not create materials, that's fine, click import. Now, if I double click on this now, you'll notice that if we come down to the build settings, we can actually turn this on and off here. So like I said, it's not at the end of the world if you do accidentally leave it on. All it will mean is that you've got three UV channels instead of 2. So if we turn this one on, this is your texture UV channel. And if we turn the other one on, that's your light map. So it's recognized it's a light map. And you'll notice the destination light map is 1. So if we had a second UV channel, we could set it to 2 here. And we're going to change the minimum light map resolution to 128. And we're going to click apply changes. And the reason for that is because we've already set it to 128 in here. Now, there is 2 settings to this. So that's build settings, but we can also change it dependent here as well. So we could change it to, say, 256. So it's always in the power of 2 we change this value. We don't ever go any other than a power of 2 number. So the highest we should go for stuff is about 512. So in a scene, what do you think needs the most resolution for shadows? No, because we're dynamic on characters. What do you think in a scene would need the highest resolution, the highest value in here, like the 512 or 1024? What do you think in a scene would be that? Right, but what in particular? Like, where do shadows get cast to mainly? The ground. Yeah, the ground needs the biggest resolution because that's where all the shadows are cast to. So a floor would have a higher resolution than, say, a table. And Unreal has its own built-in calculator that you can turn on to see what needs more resolution, what doesn't need more resolution, all that sort of stuff. I'll show you that in a minute. But for example, like a floor, say you've got a floor for a room, would you bring that in as a whole chunk, or would you bring it in as separate chunks? So we've got a massive floor, say your bedroom floor. Would you think you would have enough resolution to bring it in as a whole floor? Do we do that with walls? Anybody? Do we just bring in the whole room as a whole chunk? Yeah, you build it like a piece of construction, but like you've got to test these things and see if they work. Like you could bring the floor in as a whole chunk and it would work, and you'd have enough resolution in there, and it wouldn't look bad, and you wouldn't get like dark, thick lines and that sort of stuff. But if you do get that, you could split the floor into sections and bring one section in and duplicate it around, and then you would be able to get the kind of more resolution in there. So it's all about trial and error, basically, on here. So I'm going to just keep that at 256. I'm going to bring this into the scene. And you'll notice that it's now asking me to build the lighting because it's set to static and I need to build the lighting. So to build the lighting, we're gonna actually set this up, and later on I'm actually going to show you some techniques with lighting to kind of get the best out of it, basically, in the back end. Because as standard, it's pretty decent at standard for a first year to do rendering in. But I want you guys to kind of push it a little bit so that it's not looking like every first year Unreal project, basically. So with this as well. So that's ready to go. So I'm gonna bake it. So I'm just gonna go into build. I'm actually going to bring in the drop down menu, and I'm going to change the lighting quality to medium. And that should be right. And I'm going to click build. What that's going to do is it's going to build any reflection nodes up there to build any AI pathways it's got. And it's going to start something called Swarm Agent. So if you get an administrative pop-up called Swarm Agent, accept it, because that is the back end for. It doesn't sound strange, but Swarm Agent also allows you to link multiple computers together to build. Okay, so what we can do is here there's a little button called Show, and we can actually go into visualization here. So if I find where are you? Sorry, not Show, but if we go into Lit and go to optimization view modes, you've got something called Lightmap density, and you'll notice that if it's blue, it doesn't have enough resolution, so you can up the value of the light map. If it's green, it's perfect. And if it's pink, it means that it's selected, so the object's selected basically. And if it's red and yellow, it means the light map resolution is too high for that object. So for example, let's have a look at that. Yeah, you see how it's like 1024. I'm just going to bring that down to say 256. And you'll notice that it's now a lot better in terms of thingy. And this is just a viewport optimization that you can turn off by just clicking in here and going back to lit. But it does mean that you can see if things are like too expensive for the renderer on there. Okay. I mean that's a lot of information, and I'm going to upload this to YouTube as well, so that you can revisit this. I've also got a video on light maps more specifically, I think, if I remember rightly. Let me just go to Flip's account. Yeah, so I will link that video on Canvas, and as soon as I've uploaded this video, it will be there for you guys to look at and to use. Has anybody got any questions about kind of what I've just covered? I'm guessing when you start to do it, you will have more questions. So feel free to drop me a DM. Just make sure it's kind of in working hours. And if you do drop me at a weekend, I won't reply till Monday morning or Monday afternoon when I get around to things. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop the record there. And